Leading stories, trending topics, changing narratives. You're listening to the Critical Conversations podcast.
Welcome to Critical Conversations. I'm your host, Dr. Rick Daniels, Director of Institutional Equity and Inclusion at Oakton College. Today we spotlight one of Oakton's employee resource groups, Elevating Indigenous Voices at Oakton. Today we will unpack and discuss the origins of the group, its connections to the land Oakton occupies, and key takeaways from this year's Learning Day. I am very, very excited to be joined by two of Oakton's finest who are here today for the first time on the podcast, and I'd like to give them the chance to introduce themselves. So please, Jayne, why don't you kick us off?
All right. Hi, I'm Jayne Blacker. I'm a professor of mathematics here at Oakton, and I am an enrolled member of the Menominee Nation of Wisconsin and Forest County Potawatomi descendant.
Thank you, Jayne.
Yeah, my name is Tom Bowen. I'm a professor of philosophy here at Oakton. Thank you for having us. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Excellent. Thank you both for being here today. I appreciate your time and for helping us to uplift this really, really critical topic and this resource group on this show. So thanks today. Let's do some level setting. Can you talk about the purpose and the mission of the resource group, and maybe even take us back, if you remember, to the beginning and what initially brought you to the Elevating Indigenous Voices at Oakton resource group?
I'm actually going to let Tom take this because I wasn't there at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. How about you talk about the beginning and I'll talk about how I snuck in.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Tom, lead us off.
Sure. So as I remember it, this was really a student-led and staff-led initiative in the beginning. So sometime, I think, in the fall of 2019, there was an initiative to commemorate Indigenous Peoples Day. I think this is right around the time when Illinois began dual recognizing Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. I think it came from the Center for
CCID, Center for Campus Inclusion and Diversity. Yep.
Campus Inclusion and Diversity, and Aaron Farley was one of the people who was spearheading.
Shout out Aaron Farley.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, excellent.
And she hooked up with some students from Students for Social Justice, which is a student group here, and an old alumna, Gina Roxas. And so then they invited myself and Paul Galesian and Marianne Statz as faculty that they knew that were interested and supportive of this kind of project to join them in the fall. And then the fall of 2019, we did our first Indigenous Peoples Day celebration. Gina Roxas did a wonderful job with that. She actually came up with an initial land acknowledgement that we used then. Mm-hmm. And she had us walk through some of the trail of death that the Potawatomi people were sent on during the process of removal in the early 1800s. So it was a really impactful experience. And afterwards, when we were debriefing, we thought it would be important for us to continue that process so that every year we would get together and put together something for Indigenous Peoples Day. So that was the initial focus of the group, was just to keep that on the radar. And as we talked about it, we realized that the land acknowledgement, as much as we appreciated what Gina did, we really wanted something more developed than that. And so the first project we did was to get a grant and think carefully and do research about how we would develop our own land acknowledgement here for Oakton. Yeah. And that process is what really sort of initiated the EIVO, Elevating Indigenous Voices at Oakton. We changed our name to that in the spring of 2020 when we started the process of looking for foundation grants and stuff like that.
What was the original name?
I think we just called ourselves Indigenous Peoples Day Group or something.
Okay,
like
yeah. I remember some of those early days.
Yeah.
And I knew that there was a different name at the time. But also I remember sitting in a couple of those early meetings where we had conversations about, I just remember watching the group morph from, sort of a specific purpose and an initiative to a larger level contextual group. So it's really, it might be our first group. I remember around that time, 365 Black Employee Network was starting to grow. I think this may be considered our first, or if not one of the very first resource groups that we've had here at Oakton, at least in my time.
Okay, I didn't know that part of it, but that's great. Yeah.
I think it's just coming to me now that I'm thinking about it, actually. Yeah, awesome. And tell me about, Tom, if you can, I'll keep it here with you for just a second. Tell me about your experiences then and how they impact your experiences in the group now.
There's a lot to go over there. I mean, that was a real learning experience, I think, for all of us, because part of what we were interested in was that process of developing a land acknowledgement, what it meant. So we did a lot of research into the history of those kinds of statements, their connection to different cultural resources from different Native groups and Native peoples. And we learned a lot about the Native peoples that lived around us. So I had already had a connection with Jayne. She was a former student of mine, and she was working at that time at the Trickster Cultural Center. And so we started developing a relationship with the Trickster, the American Indian Center in Chicago, inviting people to come out and talk to us about their experiences, the history of Native peoples in this region, and also their thoughts about the land acknowledgement, what it would mean for Oakton or for anyone else to adopt a land acknowledgement. And so we actually brought in a panel twice. So we did a grant, right? We wrote a grant to bring in
foundation.
Yeah, the foundation grant to bring in a lot of local Native elders and Native peoples from the area to sort of talk with us about their experiences and what they wanted or what they would think would be important in a land acknowledgement. So in that sense, I learned a lot about what I didn't know. I learned a lot about how to sort of research and engage with this kind of knowledge. So it's not about reading books. It's not about watching television. It's about going out and talking to people, getting on the ground and helping out, volunteering at Trickster, volunteering at the AIC, and learning who people are and meeting them and talking with them. And so with that, I think in a lot of ways it changed my experience of the group going forward in the sense that I was much more humble about what I knew and what I didn't know. Much more willing to learn and to challenge even my own preconceptions about what it meant to do this kind of work. What it meant to take a leadership role and what it meant to sort of be a supportive, to be an ally. A lot of questions there are challenging, like what does it mean to work with people who are trying to do this kind of work and do it in a way that's respectful. So I learned a great deal that way. And I think that did change a lot of all of our work together. In the group, we sort of went away from a kind of centralized leadership and more diffuse leadership. People could bring their ideas in, and then people would just sort of take up leadership as it was necessary. So a couple times, I would be the one to call the meetings, or sometimes, someone like Marion would call a meeting. It just depends on. So I think in that sense,
just more decentralized.
A little bit easier, more flexible. And I think we learned a lot of that by working with people like Jayne and working with people like Trickster and AIC and others. Yeah.
Awesome. Jayne, let me come to you. Thank you for that, Tom. Tell me about your experiences, how you got involved with EIVO, and what you're experiencing now at this stage in your part with the group.
Yeah. So I was still an adjunct when I got this email of, hey, there's this EIVO group that has a meeting, and I just thought, hey, I have to get involved in that. I'm born and raised in Chicago and active in the Native community of Chicago, and also very connected to my reservation in Wisconsin. So I always feel like, I always have to be involved in terms of, making sure that people are viewing Native issues and in a appropriate lens, so to speak.
Right.
Let's not go down any stereotypical routes or anything like that. So there's just the way my mom raised me in terms of always to represent well and to always be available to help your community. So I just stumbled upon that email, and here we are today. The rest is I'm still involved in EIVO, and it's grown and evolved over the years, and I'm really excited to see what we'll do, in the next several years.
Yeah, I feel like you were getting ready to say the rest is history.
Oh, yeah.
It's like history in the making, right?
Yeah, we're still making it.
Yeah, awesome. I really like that you talked about the email and how that form of communication was able to find you.
Right.
Because I think that we see now, some people think that's an antiquated medium, but so much power can come from an email, something that you just received. And so I think that it's interesting the way that you both came to the organization and some of the work that you're doing now.
Well, like I said, at that time I was an adjunct, so you really didn't see me in the hallways as often as you do today. So that email,
that was the connection. That was
the connection. I don't think I knew Tom at the time or Marion or anyone else. Because I was only here doing my job usually for the nighttime class, and I was gone. But now you see me here almost 5 days a week in the hallways.
So who sent that email? Was it Marion? Who sent? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
I
want to thank them because now we got you on the show.
I want to think it was probably Marion. She did a lot of that early stuff, emailing out to the college and stuff like that.
Yeah, shout out to Marion Stats. Marion was the recording secretary for the Diversity Council for a period of time and really held it down for us. And so, Marion, if you're listening, we love you. Let's talk about Learning Day. We just, for our listeners out there, Learning Day is our campus-wide professional development and learning opportunity for our faculty, staff, and employees. And this year, our theme was elevating Indigenous voices at Oakton. And during Learning Day, Dr. Lila June Johnston was our keynote. And Dr. Johnston spoke about so many things. There was beatboxing, there was freestyling, there was poetry. It was really a dream of a keynote. And what I took away, one of the takeaways for me was the extractivist mentality, the mindset that takes from the earth without giving it back. I want to talk about that today. Tell me a little bit about how that concept resonates with you and in what ways does it influence the work of the EIVO?
Well, I think, I remember growing up and always just understanding if you're going to be in a space, in nature, leave it even better than what it was when you came. If there's trash on the ground, you pick it up, even if it wasn't yours. So to always just make sure that the land is taken care of in a good way. I think even just that simple, picking up garbage, like that lesson kind of resonated in me to always leave the land in a good way, better than how it was when you got there. And because our natural resources are very precious, we need them for sustaining life.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate that. I appreciate hearing that. And I think that helps connect that question of extractivism to the work of the EIVO as well. I mean, there's a way in which, for many people, our culture and our economy sort of sees the natural world as primarily a resource. And so the question we have for it is, how much of it can we take, right? I mean, and you might say that it's good that at least we started asking that question, right? The question of sustainability, how much can we take, and still sustain ourselves? But still, that's still an extractivist mentality, since our only concern is how much we can take as opposed to what we owe back.
What we can give.
Yeah, what we can give. And I think that trying to turn that around is, there's ways in which we've tried to do that in our culture, like through restoration ecology, and that kind of work. And I do think that a lot of the impulse comes from that work, people trying to work on the land and trying to heal it or repair it. First, of course, you have to sort of understand how it got damaged in this way in the first place, and what are the mentalities, what are the sort of background framing that we use to sort of read land and live on it. And I think that, for me, the question of extractivism and sort of became interesting and important when I started working on Oakton's land. So I started working here in 1998, and shortly after that, Oakton actually got a grant to do restoration work here because it has so much natural land, and to remove buckthorn, right? So I was in that first phase of, the first war on buckthorn here at Oakton. And, going into the woods and chopping stuff down and stuff like that. And, your initial thought of it is you're just out there working hard to try and repair the land. But eventually you start thinking, well, what is this work that I'm doing? All this, burning and cutting and stuff. And I'm supposed to be helping the land, but what am I doing to it? And then I start thinking, well, what's the history of this? Why is this buckthorn here, right? Where did it come from? And this is part of what led me and Marion and many others to start thinking about the longer history of this land, and how we had treated it, and who had taken care of it before us, and what that meant to take care of it in that way. What were the different ways people had sort of related to this landscape? And so in that way, when she talked about extractivist mentality, the way it sort of relates to what's going on here at Oakton is, well, how do we think of the land we live on here? Do we think of it as just a resource that we use, or do we think of it as a resource or some place that we owe something back to, or something that we should be helping to repair in some way? And then how do you involve the whole of the community in that process?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think, that resonated with me a great deal, because it caused me to ask myself what I look for when I see land. When I see land, do I think, that will make a great investment? Or do I think, what can I give back to it? I also think about the day my wife and I bought our first home, and how I grabbed Like we went and took everybody, around the house, and kids got to see it. And this was the first home we've ever bought, so it was a very special day. And I was going out of town the following day and needed to go back to the office to do some work. And so I took everybody home and got them all settled. And then on my way back to work, I rode back to the house. I went into the backyard and I grabbed some land, and I just wept. I just broke down because I thought about the ancestors that worked on lands that they didn't own and never got the chance to build on. I thought about my parents who were never able to buy a home, but then my grandparents who were able to build theirs. It was just a moment. And to me, the land was almost more important than the edifice itself, the house itself. And so that extractivist mentality caused me to kind of go back to those roots, because in that moment I was like, what can I give back to this land? What can I give back to, to show appreciation for the people who sacrificed to have to give me the opportunities to even be in a position to buy a home. And so that extractivist piece really resonated with me in a very personal way.
I really appreciate how you brought in the history there, because I do think that that's something that we often forget, that land has a history, and that there's that background that you really need to know.
Yeah, it's not just dirt.
It's not just dirt, or even grass that you got to keep cut. Right, it means something different than that.
It's metaphorically and literally like something more than just dirt. There's a lot of a history in even just that. That opportunity of you to purchase that and to settle on it with your family. It's a beautiful thing.
It really is. It really is. Let's stay here with the land piece for a second, because another takeaway for me was the reminder that land is a spiritual place. And our campus sits on sacred land, which we know. And as we honor that by reading a land acknowledgement before our board meetings, before major events. Of course, the EIVO was instrumental in our adoption of that. But I really want to talk about how lately land acknowledgements have faced criticism from both supporters and critics of DEI work. So I'm curious to know your take. What's your take on land acknowledgements? Do they serve a purpose? Do they sometimes do more harm than good? Tell us how you feel about land acknowledgements and what they mean and how they serve a purpose.
A very key thing is when I first got involved with the EIVO was, let's make sure these aren't just words on a page. Let's make sure there's actionable items to follow up on, and not just something that's, again, recited at the beginning of a meeting or a gathering. And I think it's also important to, make sure that the right voices are at the table when these decisions are made of like, okay, what are we going to do next? What are we going to bring to the Oakton community next? And so, for land acknowledgements, I see, as long as there's words behind, there's actions behind the words. I got that backwards. Actions behind the words. It's not just a show. Show that there's sincerity behind those words in the land acknowledgement of being good stewards to the land and so on.
Do you think they're performative?
I mean, they can be, and that's where, you asked about, does it do more harm than good? I think for some that, just have this little blurb on their website with no items of action, no call to action, no things to point at and say, well, we've done this or we've done that. We've connected with...
No real change, right? I mean, I think that's the real problem here. When you think about something like any DEI work, but certainly something like a land acknowledgement where it challenges, the way the business is normal, right? Because in a sense, if you're really going to acknowledge the land in the way that we're sort of asking you to do, recognize this history, there's... You don't just do it and then go back to business as usual, right? It's sort of like saying, hey, we're all on, like if I was to say, oh, by the way, I just stole your coffee cup and I'm not going to give it back. It's like, what does that mean to acknowledge this?
And every time we see each other, you acknowledge,
hey, I told you,
you took the coffee cup.
Exactly, but I'm still not giving it back to you, right? So it's like, at some point, you have to worry that just gives people an excuse, right? I've done what I can, and I don't have to do any more. So to go back to Jayne's point, it's if a land acknowledgement is performative in that way, that people can just say we no longer have to deal with these issues. Same thing with like an affirmative action statement. It could just be performative. Right? And then in that sense, it is dangerous, I think, and potentially retarding in a sense of any kind of forward progress.
Statements are a big part of my research. And my dissertation was a critical discourse analysis on institutional statements addressing anti-Black racism in 2020.
Wow.
And so in other words, I studied some of the statements that were released after the murder of George Floyd. And then, of course, I've been involved in some of the equity statements we put together here at Oakton. And I've wondered that at times, am I more part of the problem than the solution? How do we make sure we put actions behind these words? If we don't have them and don't say them and don't acknowledge them, does that do more harm than good? And so I think I'm still personally trying to find a balance where I'm making sure that I am on the action end of the words that we espouse, and making meaning of them and making sense of them, but also making action out of them as well.
So I think the action part is important. I would say that the words are important though too, how they're crafted, and because you want people to know that this is something you're committed to. You just don't want them to think that commitment is hollow, right? So you want the commitment to be there, and then you want it to actually be backed up with some kind of real resources. I mean, when you think about an institution like Oakton or any other major institution, a great deal about is who's getting the resources, how those resources are being divided up, and who's making those decisions, right? In that sense. And so that's where the real change happens, and that's where you see the real resistance in that way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Can we talk a little bit about terminology? There are at least 3 terms that I've been made aware of: Native American, Indigenous, First Nations. Some people have raised concerns about the term Native American because it still includes the word American, which comes from Amerigo Vespucci, one of the people credited with discovering, quote unquote, this land. Others prefer the term Indigenous, but also speak to the fact that Indigenous can mean anyone from that's native to a space or a land. So what are your thoughts on these terms? I really want to know, you mentioned words. Words matter. Terms matter. How we refer to different communities and their struggles matter, and it evolves over time. And as a Black man, I can tell you there's a lot of terms that have been used to describe us over the years, and some at one point were acceptable, or maybe perhaps never really were acceptable, but we gain voice and agency over time to take some of that power back in the ways in which we refer to ourselves. I'm curious to know how you feel about either one of these terms or others. And are there some that are better than others? For the listener who just wants to know the best way to make a reference, and maybe doesn't know all the history or can't give you the who, what, where, whens, and whys. Tell us about some of the terminology that you believe is most respectful, has some historical significance. Just kind of give us some of your thoughts on the terminology that's used to describe Indigenous peoples.
Well, the way I see it, if somebody walks up to me and just asks, "Oh, are you Native American?" The answer is yes. I'm not gonna, correct them on any vocabulary. But the thing is, it's not just yes, period. My answer is yes, I'm a Menominee woman.
There you go. Yes, comma.
Yes, comma. It's very not good, yes, period.
I love that. Yeah.
It's yes, I'm Menominee and Potawatomi, and if it's a fellow Native, if you can tell, like, oh yeah, hey, so what tribe? Who's your family? Those are the questions that usually follow. But yeah, I understand the idea that the idea of American comes from Amerigo Vespucci, but I don't know too many natives myself that would say, oh, I don't want to be called Native American. But also if you talk to, elders of a certain age, they'll tell you I'm an Indian. I'm an American Indian, because that was the terminology of their day. So yeah, like we all say, language matters, language evolves. Yeah, and like you said, Indigenous, no matter where you stand on this earth, Europe or Asia, there are people indigenous to that land. Right. Again, going back to land acknowledgement. So yeah, I don't want to be the voice that says, oh, this is what you call us, that is what you call us. I'm just one person. But yeah, I think it, native or indigenous is acceptable. Native American, I don't know too many folks who think that that's outdated. Yeah. So yeah, any thoughts on language, Tom?
Well, I guess the primary thought I have is that I really think it's good that there's the conversation about it, because learning how the different words and terms came in gives you an access to some history right, which you may not otherwise know, like how many people really remember Vespucci, right, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And also remembering where all those names and terms come from. You're right. I mean, I certainly have no authority to say what's the appropriate way to refer to people. And what I would do is if I am talking to someone who is Native, I would ask them, how should do you have a preference, or should I refer to you as your tribe or where you come from or something like that? And so if you're having a conversation where that's an issue, I would say you just talk to the people there. If there are no Native people present, but you're still talking about these issues, then I would just say be aware that whatever term you use, you may have to change in other contexts where it be more or less appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. For the record, I'm sure there's a historian somewhere who may be listening to this. There have been I think there's at least one or two other people who may be credited with the term America.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's some stories there that we encourage people to research. But it's the American piece that I think is highlighted because it reminds me of a Toni Morrison quote. And she once said, to be American is to be white. Everything else is hyphenated. Mm-hmm. And so I know folks, and again, I don't want to make too many direct comparisons, but just from my own experience, I know people who are vehemently opposed to being referred to as African American. Mm. And they prefer terms like black or some people even say American African. There's a whole history behind that as well. But my grandmother, I remember one time my grandmother and my grandfather fought in World War II. My grandmother helped make airplanes. And I remember once she told us, she's like, I'm an American. Yes, I'm black, but I also fought for this country. Mm-hmm. I paid taxes in this country. I bought land in this country. And so that term means something to me. And so I think within the context of this discussion, I really appreciate a couple of things. Number one, hearing you say, I don't speak for everybody. This is my own perspective, because that's also a very harmful thing that sometimes even well-intended people do. Mm-hmm. But then also to be able to give context to the space that each one of these terms may take up in the lives of people, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Excellent. So thank you for that. I want to ask a closing question to wrap things up. Tell me about some of the projects or initiatives that Elevating Indigenous Voices is working on right now, and then what's coming up, what's next, what does the future hold for this group, and how can we as Oakton employees and community members support?
Well, we just got done saying that we don't have like a very rigid structure in our group. I think we all share some basic priorities in terms of broad strokes. One is that we do want to keep the Indigenous Peoples Day alive at Oakton, so we want to keep that as a sort of ceremonial or point of Oakton's calendar. We had a harder time doing that this fall because we were so fixated on Learning Day, which was focusing on elevating Indigenous voices, and there was this Native-led climate thing. So we didn't actually get that done this year as we would have done on others. So one thing we do want to do is keep that going. And then the other thing, I think, again, broadly speaking, we want to keep Oakton focused on the action-oriented parts of our land acknowledgement, where we don't just say we recognize that these people were here, but we actively engage with thinking about what it means that they were here, thinking about bringing them back, in a sense, opening up the land and the resources to the Native peoples in this community. One thing I'd really like to see, this might be a year or so out, but Jayne and I share this vision. I think it's a powwow here on Oakton.
Wow.
Opening up something like that to bring local people in for a little powwow or something like that.
Yeah.
I would definitely like to have more of the local community coming out here to like gather, for events. To be more drumming. I think the drums we had here on Learning Day are probably the first time drums have been heard on this land for hundreds of years, right? So those are just very generally these kinds of things we're interested in. At least I am. I don't know if any member of the group has a specific plan beyond that, but maybe Jayne.
Yeah, I mean, I myself, I just have a lot of, kind of nice visions of what I would like to see in the next, several years, however long it may take. And yeah, opening up our campus to the Chicago Native community is one. Also, like just blossoming out of Learning Day, one of the presenters, Forrest Bruce, he did a presentation talking about his work through Northwestern Center for Native American Indigenous Research with ISTEAM, which focused on K through 12 students, a summer program, having them out in nature for a week-long or 2 weeks long summer camp. And I said, well, I hope when you came to our campus that you saw what we have to offer, outside of our building, and it would be awesome to collaborate with them. So hopefully that, comes to
great
fruition.
Yeah, that would be
But
awesome.
yeah, and even, but I've said it a bunch of times, like even just our building would be a great gathering space for some cultural events. And I have talked to, like the director of the American Indian Center and offered that up, and a few other community organizations. So that would be awesome to see. Another just small thing, again, we talked about the land acknowledgement. It would be nice to have a nice plaque of our land acknowledgement with, some nice indigenous art by an indigenous artist, not AI created.
Yeah, we have talked about that.
Yeah, we have talked about that. That would be nice
I
to
just
have
signaled
that.
to Brenda, like, take a note for me, please. Please, take a note. That's good. Some
to have
ideas,
a lovely plaque again, but as long as we keep it with action, it's not just a plaque at the door.
Yeah.
It's not just an announcement at the beginning of gatherings.
And actually, I would even want to say the art should be more interactive in some ways, rather than just like a picture. It should be something that draws you in, asks you questions, get you to think about it.
Yeah, I would love to see something in our cone line, art gallery too. Again, these are all just a lot of wishful thinkings I see a lot of head nodding here.
You're giving me some great ideas. I think these are the kinds of things. First of all, this is the reason why we started this series within the show, the spotlighting our Oakton resource groups, to really kind of talk critically about how we can work together to kind of bring some of these things to fruition, to collaborate, if you will. And that's given us some great ideas just from this conversation about how we can elevate all of our voices, really. But I love that idea in terms of the museum, or having something more visible, more interactive, some questions. And even in those things, there's action, because it inspires some sort of action. It inspires some sort of thought. So those are some wonderful ideas that I think we really will look into to working with you on.
Yeah. And I know, like Sylvia Rocio in the library, she's connected with us. She wants to bring in some programming for Native American Heritage Month. She has a graphic artist named Jim Terry coming in to do a demonstration and talk with the community here. And that... to keep these departments, if we can just be a conduit between connecting departments of Oakton with community resources, people, and resources.
One of the things I heard after Learning Day was how surprised people were how robust the Native community was in this region. Right, they don't know what resources are out there.
Yeah,
like the new Gitchigami Museum, right? Like the Northwestern project. I mean, there's a lot of different places. AIC, Trickster. There's a lot of different places we can connect with, and that would be great to continue to develop those connections as we go forward. Oh, and by the way, Brenda is also an important member of the group. Just want to make sure to shout out to Brenda Cruz.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And shout out to Thomas Bowen and Jayne Blacker for being our special guest today. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening, everybody. We'll catch you next time on Critical Conversations.
The Critical Conversations podcast is recorded at Oakton College, located at 1600 East Gulf Road, Des Plaines, Illinois. The show is sponsored in part by the Oakton College Educational Foundation, produced by Erick Rohn, coordinated by Brenda Cruz, and hosted by Dr. Rick Daniels. For more information or to connect with us, email critsconpod@gmail.com. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time for more Critical Conversations.